The cosmos had shattered, not in the grand, explosive manner of dying stars, but in the soul-rending implosion of absolute failure. My heavenly tribulation, a monumental trial spanning eons of meticulous cultivation, had crumbled into dust. The divine energies meant to forge me into an even higher being had instead turned against me, a cosmic retribution for a flaw I had overlooked, a wrinkle in the fabric of my existence that had unraveled my destiny. In that cataclysmic instant, my consciousness, honed over countless millennia, was not extinguished, but violently fragmented. I was ripped from my true form, adrift in the void, until a desperate, primal instinct for survival pulled me into the nearest viable vessel, a soul fragment, weak and tainted, yet undeniably a part of my original being. Her name, I learned with a disorienting jumble of her fading memories, was Elise Vance. A tragic figure in a world I did not yet understand. A life tragically short, weighed down by an overwhelming accumulation of negative karma. It was a cruel irony. An ancient cultivator, once a being of immense power and control, now trapped within a fragile, mortal shell destined for ruin. But within this despair, a new, steely resolve hardened. I, who had reached the pinnacle of existence only to fall, would not accept this predetermined end. I would inhabit Elise Vance's life, but I would steer her ship away from the rocks. My primary objective was twofold: to live a life that transcended the one she was meant to have, and, more crucially, to unravel and neutralize the very wrinkle that had caused my heavenly tribulation to fail. This was not merely about saving Elise. It was about reclaiming my own fractured destiny and preventing such a cosmic oversight from ever again jeopardizing my existence. The path ahead was obscured. The power I once wielded was a distant echo, but the determination burned brighter than any celestial fire. The first sensation was not pain, but the jarring, violent lurch of metal and glass violently contorting. My eyes snapped open to a scene of utter devastation. The opulent interior of a Rolls-Royce had been twisted into a mangled sculpture of chrome and leather, the air thick with the acrid scent of ruptured airbags and spilled gasoline. Around me, the world was a blur of flashing lights and concerned voices, but within the wreckage, I was strangely untouched. The immense power of my former existence, though severely diminished and fragmented, had instinctively coalesced around me, creating a protective shell that defied the brutal physics of the crash. It was a fleeting moment of self-awareness in this alien body, a stark reminder of the gulf between my past omnipotence and my current diminished state. However, this brief respite from physical harm was immediately superseded. A frantic yet incredibly efficient presence cut through the chaos. A young woman, her eyes wide with a terror that spoke of deep loyalty, was already at my side, expertly navigating the treacherous debris. This was Clara Chun, my prodigious assistant, a beacon of unwavering devotion. Though it seemed to me that she was destined for a path of great tragedy, following the old Elise Vance's path to self-destruction loyally. Without a moment's hesitation, she orchestrated my extraction from the wreckage, her actions precise and informed, clearly accustomed to handling delicate situations involving her employer, the old Elise Vance. The paramedics arriving on the scene were swift but secondary to Clara's immediate care. I was placed on a gurney, the cacophony of the accident fading as I was whisked away to the sterile, bewildering environment of a hospital. Even though I was fine, I could not remember the last time anyone had shown me such kindness, even from both my lives. Alone in the hushed, sterile environment of a hospital room, the true task of acclimatization began. The remnants of Elise Vance's consciousness, like faint whispers in the wind, offered fragmented memories. a mosaic of a life lived in reckless abandon. Parties, dazzlingly superficial, fueled by unchecked spending, became a recurring motif. Friends, or rather sycophantic hangers-on, circled like vultures drawn to the wealth and resources she carelessly flaunted, all while offering hollow platitudes. They were the ultimate source of this vessel's future destruction and the rapid decaying of her karma reserves. The memories painted a picture of a life utterly devoid of purpose, a superficial existence built on fleeting pleasures and exploited generosity. Amidst this revelry, a more significant figure emerged from the haze. George Croft, her fiancé. The memories painted him as Elise's complete opposite, stoic, perhaps even prudish, someone who likely viewed her extravagant lifestyle with utter disdain and disappointment. The contrast was stark, and the implications for Elise's immediate future were clear. Now that I inhabited her body, these relationships, this preordained social circle, were mine to navigate. The thought of reconciliation with George seemed improbable, given the chaotic narrative of Elise's past. Yet, the idea of simply severing ties cleanly, of mitigating the inevitable fallout from what was sure to be a spectacular breakup, began to take root. My former life had taught me the value of strategic withdrawal, of ending conflicts with minimal collateral damage. Perhaps, even in this mundane world, such principles could apply. I needed to understand the dynamics of this relationship, the weight of the engagement, and how best to extract myself without causing undue destruction, all while managing the lingering vestiges of Elise's own karma. The anticipated confrontation arrived sooner than expected, ushered in not by gentle words, but by the aggressive rustle of papers shoved directly into my face. George Croft stood before me, his expression a mixture of cold finality and righteous indignation. The documents, presented with brutal efficiency, were not merely divorce papers. They were a comprehensive agreement severing all business ties and dissolving their engagement. The terms were clear, and they were stark. As Party B, Elise Vance, I would walk away with virtually nothing tangible from the shared enterprise, retaining only my own family's ancestral wealth. The memories revealed this inheritance to be meagre, a pittance compared to the vast empire George had painstakingly built, or perhaps inherited and expanded. For the old Elise, this would have been a devastating blow, a stripping of her extravagant lifestyle. But for me, the ancient cultivator, it was acceptable. More than acceptable, it was liberating. A boring life is what this vessel needs, free of corruption and flowing with the winds of cleansing. I signed each document without a single comment on their matters. My former existence had transcended the need for material wealth. My power came from within, from understanding the fundamental forces of the universe, not from accumulating earthly riches. The idea of living a quiet, peaceful existence, free from the clamour of Elise's former life, began to solidify. Crucially, George Croft remained oblivious to the fundamental change that had occurred. He saw only the shell of Elise Vance, unaware that the true consciousness within was entirely new, a vastly different entity with entirely different priorities. This ignorance was a significant advantage. He believed he was dealing with the same woman who had squandered fortunes. He had no inkling that the person he was cutting ties with was now contemplating a life of profound introspection and detachment. Clara Chun, the quiet one, was practically vibrating over my current predicament. It warmed me to some extent, however, after much deliberation and reassurance. She did not draw upon her indignant sword to face George head-on. George Croft's actions were swift and decisive, a reflection of his cold business acumen. He moved to seize control of assets that Elise had ostensibly managed, freezing business projects that promised immense financial returns, effectively dismantling the public facade of her wealth. For me, however, this was not a setback, but an opportunity. My goal was not to reclaim the superficial riches of Elise's life, but to forge a new existence, one of peace and spiritual growth. As the corporate storm raged outside, I focused on establishing a personal sanctuary. Securing a modest apartment became my immediate priority, a quiet space away from the ostentatious displays that had defined Elise's previous life. It was here, in this newfound solitude, that the limitations of my current existence became acutely apparent. As an ancient cultivator, accustomed to worlds teeming with spiritual energy, this modern realm felt suffocatingly devoid of it. The very air seemed thin, the ambient spiritual resonance almost non-existent. Compounding this was the incessant noise of the city, a cacophony of roaring engines, distant sirens, and the ceaseless murmur of human activity that grated on my senses, disrupting the stillness required for meditation and inner peace. My powers, the profound abilities honed over millennia, were largely dormant, hindered by the lack of spiritual power in this environment. Yet, even in this state, a vestige of my former skill remained. I recalled the fundamental principles of energy manipulation and spiritual resonance. I decided I needed to create a localized pocket of tranquility, a shield against the overwhelming sensory input. My gaze fell upon a small wooden log, discarded perhaps, but emanating a faint, forgotten hum of spiritual energy. It was enough. Drawing upon ancient knowledge, I began to craft a rudimentary talisman, imbuing it with my intent to calm and silence. The process was slow, a test of my remaining latent abilities, but as the wooden artifact took shape, a subtle shift occurred. The immediate vicinity of my apartment grew quieter. The city's din receded. This was merely the beginning. I resolved to craft more such talismans, not for power or wealth, but as a means to purify my surroundings, and, by extension, to further balance the karmic ledger that had been so heavily burdened by Elise's past actions. Each simple wooden charm would be a step towards serenity, a quiet rebellion against the chaos. Stepping out of my quiet sanctuary was akin to wading straight into a tempest. My estranged family, the Vances, had clearly been stewing in their resentment. Their fury, when it erupted, was directed not at me, but at the ghost of the old Elise Vance, at her reckless spending and the scandal she had left in her wake. The verbal onslaught was severe, a torrent of accusations and disappointment that would have crushed any ordinary individual. But the true shock came at the end of their tirade. They announced with icy finality that I was no longer a Vance. The severance was absolute, a severing of name, of legacy, of belonging. They were unaware, of course, that I could perceive the subtle threads of fate, the thin pathways of their future. And I saw, with an unnerving clarity, that a significant misfortune was poised to fall upon them, a consequence of their own actions, and perhaps the karma they had accumulated through their association with Elise. Just as I was processing this grim premonition, my phone buzzed. It was Clara Chun, her voice tinged with urgency, but beamed with a thinly veiled ambition. She informed me of a potential investor, an individual whose backing was vital for a new venture, a secret company I had established under the childish guise of Elise Technologies. George himself thought it was a silly, useless thing, and did nothing against it, or deemed it far beneath his station. Either way, to me, it was a new tool in building my security. Clara's voice reverted back to her professional talk, though there were still traces of barely perceptible excitement buzzing inside of it. This investor, she explained, was notoriously difficult, known for his discerning judgment, particularly his sensitivity to spiritual energy. This piqued my interest immediately. A world that lacked general spiritual power, yet harboured individuals who could sense it, and a company whose success might hinge on my ability to harness and project such energy. The congruence of these elements was too significant to ignore. The prospect of engaging with such an individual, especially given the circumstances surrounding my family, drew me in. It was an opportunity to test my nascent abilities in this new world, and perhaps weave a new destiny, not just for myself, but for discovering what this so-called Elise technologies could truly accomplish in this mundane world. The destination was the imposing tower known as Phoenix Headquarters, a monument to corporate ambition, where the enigmatic investor, Matthew Smith, was said to hold court. The air within the lobby was charged with an almost palpable sense of corporate power mixed with ornate spiritualism, but it was a void I had become accustomed to since waking up in this world. It was here, amidst the gleaming chrome and hushed tones of power brokers, that I encountered a familiar and hostile face. George Croft. He spotted me, and a sneer of derision spread across his features. He approached with an air of smug superiority, clearly relishing the opportunity to flaunt his perceived advantage. "Still chasing your tail, Elise?" he drawled, his voice laced with condescension. He then proceeded to boast about an ancient artifact he had acquired, something that had cost him millions, a testament, he claimed, to his superior resources and foresight. The implication was clear. No matter what I was attempting, my family's meagre resources and my own current standing could never compete with his wealth and influence. He seemed convinced that this artifact, imbued with whatever power it possessed, would guarantee him favour with the investor. He failed to notice that a lingering shadow pulsed within its ceramic. He swiftly returned from his meeting with Matthew Smith, visibly crestfallen. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a grim frustration. It was evident, even from a distance, that his meeting had not gone as planned. The investor had flatly refused his proposition, his ancient artifact proving to be an insufficient lure. This proved to me that my idea of visiting Matthew was indeed fortuitous. A man who could see through such a petty treasure was sure to bring some excitement in my otherwise newfound quiet life. George Croft, for all his wealth and purported connection to ancient relics, had been dismissed. His attempts to leverage his past connection to me and his current material might proved utterly ineffectual. My encounter with George Croft at Phoenix Headquarters was brief, a mere prelude to what was to come. As Clara Chun and I prepared to meet with Matthew Smith, the investor's assistant approached us. To my surprise, he expressed that Mr. Smith was eager to meet with me, having apparently sensed something unique about my presence. This expedited the meeting I had anticipated. I had glazed over during Clara's briefing, opting to go with the flow of change. Change descended faster than a blinking eye. Upon entering the private chamber, I found myself before an elderly man, Matthew Smith, whose very aura radiated a profound, lifelong quest for enlightenment. While his personal spiritual energy was a mere spark by the standards of my former existence, it was far more potent than anything I had encountered in this world thus far. More importantly, he possessed a meagre ability to sense the residual echoes of my past life's power, an almost forgotten resonance that had survived my fragmented descent. He gestured for me to prepare tea, a complex ritual he expected me to perform, perhaps as another test of my capabilities. I complied, but instead of the elaborate brew he might have anticipated, I chose a simple, unassuming blend. As I served him, I offered a quiet observation. It is not the value of the tea that one should be looking at, but the world tea brings to the one drinking it. He took a sip, and in that moment, The air shifted. His eyes widened and he immediately bowed, his voice filled with awe as he addressed me, "Master." Clara Chun stood beside me, utterly flabbergasted. She could not comprehend how a simple tea ceremony had led to such a profound reaction. My silly little platitude, of course, was complete nonsense. The truth was, unbeknownst to her, the simplicity of the brew belied its power. I had imbued the tea with the subtle infusion of my spiritual energy, a touch of the essence that had once defined my existence. This small act, this gesture of understanding true value beyond material worth, had resonated deeply with Matthew Smith, the seeker of enlightenment. The partnership for Elise Technologies was secured, not through intricate business proposals or powerful artifacts, but through a shared appreciation for a moment of genuine spiritual connection and his supposed enlightenment. The terms offered were exceptionally generous, a testament to the profound impression I had made, far beyond what any mere business acumen could achieve. A few days later, Clara Chun approached me with another engagement, this time a networking gala, an event designed to foster connections within the city's elite circles. She mentioned the presence of another potentially significant investor, a Mr. Bob Jackson, and urged me to attend, seeing it as a crucial opportunity for Elise Technologies. While the prospect of further business opportunities was appealing, my senses also detected something more unsettling. A palpable, foul energy, a miasma of negativity, seemed to emanate from the venue itself. It was, as a short I was watching said, giving off bad vibes. For some reason, Clara's eyes nearly rolled out of her corporate head when I relayed the message to her. As a cultivator, I understood the pervasive influence of karma, both positive and negative. If this gathering was tainted, and if my presence was somehow tied to the old Elise Vance's karmic debt, then it was my responsibility to address it. I decided to attend, not just for business, but for the implicit obligation to cleanse any lingering darkness. The gala was a dazzling spectacle of wealth and influence, a stark contrast to the quiet introspection I preferred. And there, amidst the throng, I saw George Croft. His face was a mask of barely concealed fury. He was still fuming from the news of Matthew Smith's partnership with Elise Technologies. He, of course, was initially utterly ignorant of the fact that Elise Technologies was indeed my company, named after me, and that I was the driving force behind its success. And it seemed that he did not have the time to properly lick his wounds. The irony was amusing. He must have found out afterwards that the next proposal to Matthew Smith was mine, or rather Clara's. "You ungrateful, two-faced bitch! How dare you show your face here? Haven't you embarrassed the Vance family enough?" he spat. The stemware in his hand wobbled, nearly staining his cufflinks with blood-red wine. He looked at my outfit, a $20 number I picked up from Target, with disdain. I shrugged. It was comfortable, adding acceptable comfort to my mundane world. Clara looked like she was going to explode, but I held her hand down. As the evening progressed, the sought-after investor, Bob Jackson, made his entrance. To George's visible chagrin, Jackson bypassed him entirely, his attention drawn directly to me. It was then I understood the source of the oppressive atmosphere. The negative karma clouding the venue, a palpable distortion of energy, was emanating directly from Bob Jackson himself. Bob Jackson approached me with an eager, almost desperate intensity. He was willing to partner with Elise Technologies immediately, but on one crucial condition. I had to resolve his severe health issues and provide additional spiritual consulting. It was as if the universe itself was listening in on our conversation, for as he spoke, his face contorted in pain. He clutched his chest, gasping for air. A heart attack, sudden and severe, had struck him down. Without a second thought, drawing upon the remnants of my vast knowledge, I retrieved a specially prepared tonic I had been carrying, a concoction designed for precisely such emergencies. I administered it to him swiftly, and within moments his labored breathing eased, the color returning to his face. He had been pulled back from the brink of death. The dramatic turn of events brought the gala to an abrupt, premature end, but the impact on the attendees was profound. Those who had witnessed the unfolding drama were no longer looking at the fallen socialite Elise Vance with the disdain or gossip they had held before. Instead, their gazes were fixed upon me with a mixture of shock and awe. George Croft, predictably, was incandescent with rage, his own thwarted ambitions and his inability to comprehend the unfolding events fueling his fury. I paid them no mind, their stunned expressions and George's impotent anger fading into the background. I practically had to drag Clara Chun, who was equally starstruck and bewildered like the rest of the crowd, out of the venue by my side. I departed the scene, leaving behind a ripple of disbelief and a newly forged reputation for the woman they thought they knew. My immediate destination, after leaving the gala, was not the hospital but my apartment. I grabbed one of the small, karma-cleansing wooden talismans I had been crafting, a simple but potent artifact designed to bring peace and balance, then instructed Clara to take me to the hospital, where Bob Jackson had been taken for further observation. As we approached the private suite, his imposing bodyguards moved to intercept us, their stances defensive and wary. However, they were quickly overridden by a firm order from Bob Jackson himself, who, despite his precarious health, was clearly adamant about our entry. Inside, he lay in his hospital bed, his breathing still a little shallow, though stable. I presented him with the wooden talisman, instructing him to keep it with him at all times, in addition to his prescribed medical treatments. I explained that, while the talisman offered spiritual solace, his physical recovery would still require diligent medical care. Then, venturing into the realm of geomancy, I pointed out a more fundamental issue affecting his well-being. His ancient cherry tree, I revealed, situated in the courtyard of his mansion, was inadvertently blocking a crucial ley line, creating an ominous flow of feng shui that was subtly undermining his luck and health. I advised him that the tree needed to be relocated to allow for a harmonious flow of energy, ensuring his fortunes would then turn around. The talisman and the advice on feng shui were not merely spiritual platitudes. They were practical applications of universal energies designed to address the root causes of his misfortune, both spiritual and environmental. The bodyguards were suspicious of my predicaments, because I have never been there. They assumed I was a corporate spy of some sort, but Bob waved them off. I left, knowing that he would accept the truths I gifted him soon. The transformation of Elise Technologies was nothing short of miraculous. Under Clara Chun's astute and tireless management, the company, bolstered by Bob Jackson's renewed confidence and subsequent investment, blossomed into a veritable empire. Profits surged, exceeding all expectations, a testament to Clara's business acumen and the unique, spiritually infused direction I provided. Bob Jackson himself was ecstatic. The immediate positive effects of my intervention were palpable. After he followed my advice and moved the ancient cherry tree, his fortunes began to soar. He discovered an ancient, priceless piece of artwork hidden away, and several of his companies, which had been teetering on the brink of collapse, experienced sudden and substantial windfalls. The feng shui correction, combined with the spiritual bolstering provided by the talisman, had evidently rebalanced the cosmic scales in his favor. He, along with Matthew Smith, now frequently contacted me. Their calls were no longer just about business partnerships or investment. They sought my counsel on various spiritual matters, their respect for my understanding of universal energies and karmic balance growing with each passing day. I, the ancient cultivator, had not only saved Elise Vance's life, but had inadvertently built a prosperous enterprise and cultivated a network of powerful allies, all while navigating the complex currents of a world vastly different from my own. The serenity I had cultivated was, as it often is, fragile. George Croft, his eyes bloodshot and his demeanor radiating raw desperation, finally confronted me again. This time his words were less laced with arrogance and more with the bitter accusation. "You're not the old Elise Vance," he spat, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "She was useless, a liability. But you've changed. I know you're hiding behind your family's resources. You're ruining me on purpose, and the Vances are frauds." His outburst revealed a deep-seated resentment, a twisted perception of our past interactions. He saw my success as a personal affront, my newfound capability as a deliberate act of sabotage against him. I met his accusations with a quiet, measured response, a soft tone that belied the immense power I now wielded, even in this diminished form. "Maybe," I replied softly, my gaze steady. "You never really knew the real me." The words hung in the air, leaving him momentarily speechless. He huffed, unable to process the truth I had subtly revealed, and retreated, but not before issuing a thunderous declaration. He was declaring war on Elise Technologies, and for good measure on Vance Corp, my former family's company. His ego, bruised and battered by his losses, could not accept defeat gracefully. "You'll regret this." He was determined to fight, to reclaim whatever he felt he had lost, blind to the futility of his struggle against forces he could not comprehend. I was not one of this world or its desires for material wealth, still choosing to live in my little apartment and lining my subordinates' pockets with the fruits of their own labor. They did not see it that way, but that's how the Tao works. Form can be perceived in many ways. And me? Well, I prefer lying on my couch quietly while listening to Clara Chun ramble on about her quarterly reports. She had gotten used to the new me, efficient as ever, and no longer looked like a frightened rabbit, skirting about my tiny apartment. The talismans had a tiny part of that, but it was her efforts alone that had drawn me to her and allowed her in. The corporate war George Croft had declared barely lasted a week. Clara, my prodigious assistant, who had now become an indispensable partner, proved to be a titan of industry in her own right. And now, she was my sword. She orchestrated a swift and decisive victory, dismantling George's company with ruthless efficiency before any of the major investors he might have courted could even get involved. The speed and completeness of the defeat were astonishing. The other companies, seeking favor from Elise Technologies, smelled blood in the water and swarmed his empire in solidarity with us. When George and I met again, it was not amidst the clatter of war, but in the quiet aftermath of his utter collapse. The loss of his company had clearly taken a profound toll, stripping away the veneer of his arrogance and revealing the vulnerable man beneath. I have lost control somewhere back then. When you crashed my second car, that was when I snapped. He admitted, his voice hollow. I looked at the loss of $1 million vehicle, then to you, and thought about the money, even though it was nothing in the end. He confessed that he hated me not for my power, but because I acted so freely, so detached from the ruthless pursuit of wealth that had defined his own life. He was a product of his upbringing, an heir trained to be a calculating machine, devoid of genuine emotion, focused solely on the bottom line. He has even admitted that the loss of his company didn't bother him as much as losing me had, that my departure from his life, or rather Elise's departure, had been a genuine blow to his heart. I listened to him calmly, My own ancient heart was barely moved by the complexities of his plight. "It's all right," I told him softly, offering a measure of peace and effectively mending the feud that had consumed him. Then, as he dared to ask if we could get back together, I stopped him and raised my hand. On my finger, glinting under the soft light, was a ring. It was a ring Clara Chun had given to me, a symbol of her devotion and commitment. She had proposed to me, and I had accepted. Yes, Clara Chun and I had married in the spring. My journey had begun in failure, but it had led me to a new life, a new purpose, an unexpected love, far removed from the heavenly tribulation I had left behind. Though the wrinkle still required more fixing in other lives, perhaps, before I return to that celestial height again, I will live the rest of Elise Vance's life in earnest light,